My name is Micah Morgan. I'm an instructor in the computer science department, and I am doing a Eureka project this semester with Victor Marchesi. So my project that I am going to be talking about is data mining and data sanitization. Data and big data is going to be very important for a lot of different fields. Anyone who's interested in using like a lot of text information is very important that we can do with data mining. You might have heard the terms like big data before, and I think this is something that can be relevant to lots of other students in the class, not just computer science majors. And I'd kind of like to talk a little bit about some of the ways that you can get information to use for big data if you were interested on using it for a study. Some ways that you might need to like process data, or some of the vocabulary that you might need to know if it was something that you were interested in doing in the future. So the first step, this first slide, is kind of how would you get your information? If you were wanting to do a project that used a lot of input information that you wanted to process, there are lots of ways that you can find that information online. So one thing that you can do, if you Google like open access data repositories, open access means that it's going to be free and available for you to use for a research project. And then a repository is just going to be like a grouping together of information and a grouping together of data. If I click on this link, this is an article that is a couple of years old, but it's a good article. It has lots of different repositories linked. So Awesome Public Data Sets is a good one. GitHub is a website that people use to store their programs, and they also use it to store lots of data files and text files. So Awesome Public Data Sets is a really good one on GitHub. And then just lots of these are linked. Some people that are in the humanities perhaps could be very interested in social media posts. Social media is a really easy way to find lots and lots of data, lots and lots of information that is easy to process because it tends to be textual data. So you might not use a social media site like, Instagram or Snapchat, which is going to have a lot of photos and videos, but you could definitely use a more text-based platform like Twitter is a very popular one to use for big data, or Reddit, which is what we are using in our project. So I think what I have linked here is so this is that GitHub website that I was mentioning before. So GitHub is a popular website to host code, but also to host text files, data files, input information. So this is a repository that is just a lot of like Twitter information. And if you go in and look at it, they have the data sets labeled by topic. So I think I had seen one here, like here's one that's COVID-19, ones that are from maybe particular areas, ones that are like they've gone through and grouped things based on if they contain a certain hashtag. Because Twitter has like hashtag labels, it's really easy to group together comments that are all related to a particular topic. And then App Store reviews can be a really good source for big data because, again, it's textual. There are a lot of libraries that already exist to scrape. So whenever we say like web scraping, or, if you're scraping data from online, what you're really talking about there, or crawling, you might also have heard of like web crawling. What they mean by those terms is that you are writing a program, you're using some sort of software tool that can go through a website and it can store the data in a file. So then you could use that as an input. You could use that as input to some program, some tool that you would write to do something with the data. Python is a programming language It's very beginner friendly and user friendly, and it has a lot of great built-in functionality to do things in the data science field. So if you're interested in doing any sort of data mining or, processing with these things, you're probably going to want to be using Python, especially if you don't have any sort of computer science background. Python is going to be a great language for like a beginner to use. So they have these built-in like app store scrapers, and there is also a built-in, this one is specifically for Apple. There is another one that is specifically for Google Play. And so you can just download these libraries. And then if you go through and read the documentation, you can see all of the different tools that are like built in and available in them that you could use to go through and search. So you in web crawling, just a website that's just of your own choosing. So you might have some specific data that you are wanting to process and do something with, but maybe it's not one of these, like you're not trying to use an input that already exists. You would like to crawl a website to get information on a particular topic that you are interested in. So there are tools to do that as well. That's definitely an option. And again, Python is going to be my recommendation for doing that. So there is a built-in tool in Python called Beautiful Soup. Beautiful Soup is going to be really helpful to go through and get data from really any website that you were interested in going through and kind of searching for. So this article is a pretty good article. It's fairly recent. It's pretty short and easy to read. And they also recommend that you use Jupyter notebooks. So if you are wanting to do some data science tools, you are going to have some code, and you're going to have to be able to run and execute that code. So probably if you don't have much experience in computer science, you're not really going to have an environment set up to write and execute code in. So it could be really helpful to use online editors. A Jupyter notebook is wonderful because you can just run it online. You can have text that sort of explains what the code is doing, and then little code snippets, and you can run each little code snippet independently. And so in this article, they kind of show you how to create a Jupyter notebook and how to like get started with one, and how you can bring in the Beautiful Soup library. What we are doing for our Eureka project is using Reddit comments. If anyone else is interested in using Reddit comments as input data, there is this online repository, and it's free and it's open access. And this person has actually stored the entirety of history of all Reddit comments. So you can see it kind of starts back here in 2005. This is the year. I'm assuming RC stands for Reddit comments. And then there is the year, and then there is the month. So then you just kind of keep going through, and you can scroll, and it's pretty recent. I mean, he updates them pretty recently. Whenever you get information from online, whether it's through any of these various sources, is the way the data is structured might be a little bit unfamiliar to you, because you will not get just the text that you see on the screen. That's not really like the way that data is stored. It isn't stored like just the words, like the way that they are displayed. The way that it's going to be stored, if I can get back to where I just was, frequently it will be stored as a JSON object. So JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation, where JavaScript was kind of the programming language that this format was originally written for, but it can be used for all programming languages. But the way a JSON works is it's just a bunch of key value pairs. So it says, this is the type of information. So that's like the key. And then it'll say, this is the value that's stored inside of it for this particular entry. So for Reddit comments, they are stored as a series of JSON objects. And you can see the files get very, very large very, very quickly. So one of the big issues we have had in our project is how large the files are and what you can kind of do about working with very large files like that. So I want to talk about some of those file types next, and I'll go into JSON because that's kind of what I was just in the middle of talking about. Whoops. So a JSON is going to be like key value pairs. And these are the JSON pairings that we ran into for Reddit. For one single comment, one single piece of data, there were 46 pieces of information stored for that one piece of data. So that's kind of what I was saying a second ago with like when you try to get information from these online sources, you aren't going to get just the text themselves, because what the computer has to store is all of this background information on, the computer needs to know this information to know how to display it on the screen. Or, there might be certain commands that you run, or there might be times that, so things that we as users might not really think about. You don't really think about all of these pieces of information that need to be stored for just like one single little entry, but the computer needs to know it in the background. And so this is all of the information that is stored for it. And if you do some sort of data mining where you request to get this information from the website, you are going to get it in a form where it will have, like if it's in a JSON object, it will have curly braces around every entry. And then it will have each one of these will be the key. So it'll say like all wordings, and there will be like a colon. And then it will say the value for it. So like for this particular comment, does it have awards? And then if it does, it'll list them. And then for the next comment, it'll be in its own curly braces, and it will have all of this same data again. And so one of the things that you might want to do, which is kind of the topic of this video, is you might have to go through and sanitize your data. You might wind up saying, I don't actually need all of this information for what we said was maybe purposeful for us is what was the comment, what was the score, and what was the community that it was posted in. And that was really the only 3 pieces of data that we needed. So you might have to go through and sanitize your input. If you use some sort of data mining tool, you might wind up getting a lot of information that you don't really need. And because the files are already so large, you might be having to store and process a lot of information that has nothing to do with what your study is trying to look for. But that's just kind of like what a JSON file is and what it looks like. The structure of that just means that you have, for every entry, you are going to have all of these types of information stored. So for every single comment, you would have all 46 of these as like keys, and then there would be a value paired with it, a key value pairing. A CSV file means a comma separated file. And the way that looks is it's going to look like a bunch of text with just commas in between every single entry. And then oftentimes the new entry will kind of like go down to the next line. But then you can have commas separating all of the different pieces of data for each entry. So a common way to open and view a comma separated file would be like in a spreadsheet. The reason I have ZST listed here is because our website repository that we had, so if I go to ours, you might have noticed the file extension was ZST. That's because all of these files are compressed. Even though these files are huge, they are actually much, much larger than this on a magnitude of, like up to 100 times greater than what you even see here, because they have been, this is a compressed file. You've probably, heard of like a zipped file, you know what a compressed file is. And in order to actually do something with that data, you have to extract it. So this is a compressed file where it has been compressed with the Z standard library, which is an open source library that was created by Facebook. And it allows for very fast compression and decompression. And I'll let you guess what you could use to interact with the Z standard library. It's going to be Python again. So Python really would be a very worthwhile tool to kind of get into like the basics of how to use things in Python if you were interested in doing any sort of data mining. So let's say that you have picked your repository, you have found your data, you've scraped it online, whatever you want to do, and you've got this huge file and you want to know, what does it even look like? How is your data stored, and how do you open it up and view it? There is an online file viewer that we have been using that I have linked here. You can choose your file. So like if I go to our input test, we could choose like a very large file. You can see this file is 31.1 gigabytes. So that's a very large file. If I tried to just open this file, for example, in Word, I'll show you that right now, actually. If I were to just come to input test and I were to try to open, you can see this is like 32 gigabytes or whatever. Open it, you cannot do that in just like Notepad. This is like too large, a 32 gigabyte file to open in a traditional text editor that you might be used to working with. However, if we go, here online to a tool like this, like how do you open large files tool, and I say open, then what it will do is it will stream things. It will open them up in chunks. So of that 32 gigabytes, which is a very, very large file, it's only going to open 10,000 bytes at a time. And so then you can actually go through and see, and these are like Reddit comments, right? So I maybe should not scroll very much on that because there could be some text that I maybe don't want to display on the screen. But you can see that this website is able to open and view that file because it can view it in 10,000 bytes at a time, as opposed to trying to open the entire file all at once, which would be way too large for any text editor to open. The final thing that I want to talk about is the data sanitization, like kind of stripping the data. So I had mentioned that one of the problems that we had was having all of that extra background information that you get whenever you crawl for data online. You get all that kind of background information. So for example, we had like 46 pieces of data and we only wanted 3. So if you were going to try and strip data, I would recommend Python. There are lots of tools that already exist online. Like you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to be able to write all of these things from scratch. They already exist. I'm kind of just trying to give you some ideas of like where to look or what to look for, what vocabulary to use, or, kind of what I personally would recommend using based on the experiences that we've had this semester or my experiences from programming in the past. So Python is what I would recommend beginners to use because it's a very user-friendly language. And then once again, if you would need some sort of environment to write and run your code in. So I would recommend an online editor such as a Jupyter Notebook, such as Google Colab. Anyone with a Google account can create a Google Colab. That's like creating a Google Doc or a Google Sheet or a Google Slide. And so lots of people, I think, are going to have access to that. And then it can run, it's all web-based. So you don't have to like download anything or create anything or kind of set it up on your local environment. It'll run online. So that's very nice. Also, you might have to if you have a very large input file, you might have to chunk it. We have been using the Pandas library for that, which is a library in Python. And it has had lots of good built-in tools. So we've had lots of luck using the Pandas library. It has been a bit of a learning curve for us, but there is good documentation online. You could, and there are lots of built-in tools. So if you look online, you can kind of see some of the things that are built in to be able to do, even if you would not know, how to go through and write it like yourself from scratch. you can read and see what other people have done and apply their tools to what you are trying to do. So I will end by showing you, this is our code that we ran that we use to sanitize our input data. So a lot of this is probably very confusing to people that have never seen code before. A lot of it is confusing even if you have seen code before, but this is linked in here. And it would kind of, a lot of this you could kind of use for other files as well. You could just change, the file of your input that you were wanting to work with. And you could go through and change what types of data you were wanting to search for. But I bet that it is likely that many of you, if you were trying to get input data from online, you're going to be working in a JSON format anyway, and you're probably going to be working with very large data that would need to be chunked. So I hope that you learned something in here that you could keep. I'm not expecting that anybody would be able to actually go through and write a full-blown Python program off of this little, 15-minute video, but maybe you learned some about how data can be scraped, how data can be stored, how you can open it and view it, and some of the things that you would need to do to scale the data down to what you would want relevant to your research topic. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. And I wish everyone the best of luck with completing your projects this semester. Thank you.